Hello again. I've mentioned before that historian David Olusoga, favourite of the BBC, is very prone to distorting the past in order to give a false impression. I give a link in the description to this video of a little film he made for the BBC in which he does exactly this. People trying to portray Britain in the past as being a racist country, as bad as the southern states of America, are irritated that there were no lynchings of the kind which were popular in the United States in this country. If there were no lynchings in Britain, maybe we could make one up. Olusoga claims in the video, which was produced by the BBC, that a lynching took place in Liverpool in 1919. The BBC actually paid for a plaque commemorating this supposed lynching. This may be seen in the thumbnail to this video. There wasn't, of course, a word of truth in it. I've explained before how Charles Wotton, the man about whom all this is claimed, actually shot 3 police officers and met his death while attempts were being made to arrest him as he fled the scene of the crime. What hardly anybody knows, and this is very interesting, is that there was a genuine lynching just 3 years later in Britain. You could hardly expect the BBC to be interested in this story, though, or to provide a commemorative plaque. You see, the victim of this real lynching was white. I described the incident at some length in one of my books, this one in fact, about commuters. I thought I might read out what happened from the book. I researched court records and old newspaper reports, but I give a link so that people can see that I'm not making it all up. It's rather a curious story, and as I say, very few people seem to be aware of this. I will probably improvise as I read out. Where are we now? Buses in Victorian London were very much a preserve of the middle classes, whereas trams from their very beginning were used chiefly by working class people. These trends were quite inflexible for decades, and the wrong person using a type of public transport which was not associated with his class or social standing could expect disapproval and resentment. By that I mean this, that a city clerk going to work in the morning on the bus would be surprised and not particularly pleased if he found a working man sitting next to him. Conversely, the working men regarded the trams as being their own particular way of transport. They would have looked askance at any well-dressed person with a collar and tie travelling on the tram. They would have felt it was an intrusion into their own space. This has relevance to what happened. In Glasgow, in the years following the end of the First World War, this class-based division of public transport was particularly noticeable. On 11th of September 1922, a ship docked in the Clyde, and the ship's cook then travelled from there to his home in Glasgow. Robert Alexander Stewart was 35, and when he was not at sea, shared a house in the Ibrox district of Glasgow with his wife and also a widowed friend of his. This friend's wife had died in childbirth, and his 5-year-old son lived with Stuart's sister-in-law in another part of Glasgow. Stuart was very fond of the little boy, and as soon as he got home he set off to bring the boy home to stay with him while he was ashore. Stuart's sister-in-law lived in the Cwmbuslang area of Glasgow, and when he arrived there in the evening he met the child and then took him onto a tram heading back to Ibrox. Robert Stewart was dressed smartly in a suit, and the child with him looked shabby in comparison and was not wearing any shoes. The sight of this well-dressed man accompanied by a ragged-looking child was enough to anger some of the passengers on the tram, who were in the main working people heading home after a day's work. The previous year there had been several cases in Scotland of children being abducted and abused, and 2 women on the tram were suspicious of Robert Stewart, firstly because he was a single man in the company of a child, but chiefly because of the apparent disparity in class between him and the child who was with him. John Buchanan, the conductor of the tram, said later that some passengers had told him that the man with the child was of a different type from the boy, by which he understood that the child was working class, but the man appeared not to be. There's no doubt at all that class played a major role in what happened next. One woman, deciding that the smart-looking stranger was trying to take advantage of a working-class boy, pulled Alastair Stewart away from the man he knew as Uncle Bob. When Stewart protested, the cry was raised that he was a kidnapper. There must have been a nightmarish air about the situation for the ship's cook, who was simply taking the little boy home to his father. Other passengers became involved and took the little boy further away from the man he was with, and there began a furious and chaotic scene. In effect, Stewart was driven from the tram, and it appeared to the conductor that he was fleeing. The man then blew a police whistle, and some of those on the tram chased after the hapless man, whom they now decided was a child molester. In the street, a hue and cry was raised, and Stewart was set upon by a mob. A number of people began kicking and punching him. It actually ended with somebody getting hold of a clothesline, making a noose from it, and Stewart was strung up from a lamppost. When the police arrived, he was half dead from being hanged, but also he had 12 serious external wounds where people had stuck knives in him, and 5 broken bones. In plain terms, he had been beaten to death by the infuriated commuters from the tram before being half hanged. 2 men were charged with murder as a result of the lynching, but when they appeared in court, the verdict was not proven, which is a Scottish verdict, which means that although there's a great deal of suspicion, it's not possible to bring the crime home to the people. Here is a very interesting story of a genuine British lynching, about which hardly anybody has ever heard. But the BBC will never cover it because it's about the death of a white person. This is what I mean by the erasing of white history. Here is a piece of British history that the BBC and various left-wing historians would rather make up stuff about black people instead. In other words, fake history is being composed and it's being provided on the National Broadcasting Service in preference to real events about real people. The only interest seems to be in constructing stories which feature black people.